quick. So let's head on. What am I going to do? I'm going to look at 4 areas. I'm going to look at the problem with the sources. Then I'm going to hit Mecca, go from there to Muhammad, and then from there to the Quran. We're going to end with the Quran because it's by far the most damaging material. Much of what I'm going to be introducing tonight, most of you have never seen before. And if you have, well, great, God bless you, because then you'll probably understand a little bit. But most of you, this will be new. What are the claims that the Muslims make concerning the standard Islamic narrative, S-I-N? Isn't that great? Sin. We're going to shut down sin tonight. The standard Islamic narrative are their traditions. This is what every Muslim needs to know. Though every Muslim, whether they are radical or nominal or liberal, how they walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep is dependent on those traditions, on the standard Islamic narrative. Now they all believe, every Muslim would believe that Muhammad was the last and greatest prophet, born in Mecca in 570, died in Medina in 632, modeled Islam as a paradigm for the whole world, and received the Quran as his final revelation. Therefore, the Quran is his revelation, sent down between 610 and 632. It is the greatest, the only perfectly preserved revelation according to Islam, the final revelation, and it corrects everything that has gone before. Therefore, Islam, naturally, they would say, is their final religion based on Muhammad's life and saying, that's the Sunnah, and on the Quran's teachings. Conclusion? Well, obviously, they're dependent on 3 things: the book, the man, and the place. And that's what we're going to confront tonight: the book, the man, and the place. The book, the Quran, the man, Muhammad, and the place, Mecca. Since all 3 are foundational to Islam, without one of them, the others 2 fall. We should investigate all 3, and we're going to do that tonight. But in the 7th century, and in the central part of Arabia, the Hijaz, where Mecca and Medina are placed. To do that, we need to start with the sources. Where are we going to go? Where did all these stories come from? Everything we know about Muhammad, everything we know about Mecca, everything we know about the book itself has to come from a source. Now, let's go and look at that source, because this will underline why there's a problem with everything else tonight. Now, to be that, I want you to look at this map. Here's a map of the Middle East, of Arabia. According to the standard Islamic narrative, Muhammad's empire encompassed that brown area. So look at the brown area. That's what existed in Islam up until 632 when he died. Then what they tell us is the Rashidun period came into existence. That's Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. The next 4 caliphs, they encompass that orange area. So there is the expansion moving out, and then you have the Umayyad dynasty, which is the first real big caliphate, according to them. That's the purple area. I don't care too much about the purple area tonight. I want to look at the brown and the orange area, okay? That's the area I want to look at. So from Tripoli in the west all the way to Afghanistan in the east, from Turkey in the north down to Yemen in the south. Bear with me, let's go to it. Now here's what they say. This is their narrative. This is not my narrative. They say that Muhammad was born in 570. The Quran was revealed beginning in 610. He then moves up and goes up from Mecca all the way up to Jerusalem, goes up to the 7 heavens, meets Allah, comes down, meets Moses, and finds out that he's to pray 50 times. Moses says, get it down. So he bounces back and forth between the 7th and the 5th heaven and gets it from 50 down to 30, down to 20, down to 10, down to 5 prayers. So that happens in 621. He then moves out of Mecca, moves up to Medina in 622, comes and takes over Mecca and defeats Mecca in 633, and then dies in 632. So that's the life of Muhammad according to their traditions. Once he dies, Abu Bakr takes over for 2 years. He dies peacefully. And then comes Umar, who takes over for 10 years. He does not die peacefully. He is killed. And then, of course, Uthman takes over, and he lasts for about 12 years before he is killed. But while he is there as the caliph, the Quran is finalized. So the Quran, the book we're going to look at tonight, was created. This book that I have in my hands right here is from Uthman. That's what every Muslim will tell you. And then when he is killed, Ali takes over, and he only lasts about 5 years before he is defeated there at the Battle of Siffin by Muawiyah. So, conclusion, Islam was fully formed in the Hijaz by 661. That's what they say. Do you all believe that? We'll say yes for now, okay? In about an hour, you can say no. But for now, let's just say yes. Go with me. Now, here's the question. Everything I've just told you, how in the world and where do you get it from? Well, you would hope that it comes from people that were actually living at that time, right? And from people who are actually living there, right? Eyewitnesses, like we have with Jesus. Matthew, He was an eyewitness. John, he was an eyewitness. You would hope the same thing would work with Islam. Well, let's go and see what we find. In order to know who Muhammad was, everything that we happened, everything that I've just showed you, we need to go back to the sources for all these stories. Now, Muhammad dies in 632. The first source we get are what we know is his biography, known as the Sirah. So who wrote the biography? Somebody who knew Muhammad, right? No. The first one they claim who writes it down was Ibn Ishaq, who died in 765. That's 130 years after Muhammad. Is there a problem there, folks? Okay, you're coming with me. Let's continue. But we don't have Ibn Ishaq. We have to go to this guy here, Ibn Hisham. He is the one that actually writes down what Ibn Ishaq says, throws out most of it, and only retains what he likes. He dies in 833. After him comes Al-Waqidi, who dies in 835. That's what we know about Muhammad. Nothing from Ibn Ishaq. So let's just get rid of Ibn Ishaq. Whoop, but there he goes. But that's not the only thing we have. That's not the only. We have an enormous amount of material on Muhammad, on what he says. This is known as the Hadith. And the sayings, these are the sayings of what Muhammad said. They were first written down by Al-Bukhari. Now look at his date, 870. You thought Ibn Ishaq was bad enough. This is 240 years after the fact. And after him, there's others like Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, you have Tirmidhi, you have Majah, you have Abda, and then you have Nasai. So those are the six, what they thought authoritative hadith compilations that were put down. But look at, they're all in the 9th and 10th century, right? And then you have two more genre of what we know as a standard Islamic narrative, the tafsir and the tahqiq. The tafsir would be the commentaries which explain the Quran, and then of course the tafsir, which would be the histories of all mankind up until Muhammad. First written down by Al-Tabari. Look at his date. He died in 923. Now I'm putting you their death dates purposely because everything was written normally within 20 years of their death dates. That's when they would be written. But it could be changed and continue manipulated all right up until they died. Notice, everything I've showed you doesn't even begin to get written down for 200 years. 200 years after Muhammad died, you get the Sirah, then you get the Hadith, another 240 years, and it's not till the 10th century that you even get the Tafsir and the Tahqiq. Abdul Malik's name I'm putting up there because he's the first one to introduce us to anybody called Muhammad. Look, when he introduced that, he introduces it in 692. Muhammad died in 632. You've got 60 years before he's even introduced into the world stage. Does that bother any of you? But the Muhammad we're going to talk about, the Muhammad of Islam, that Muhammad was introduced by these people, the Abbasids. And they do so, they come to power in 749. The Muhammad that we look at is all their invention. And they had 84 years to finally get down his biography and about 100 years to get down his sayings and, of course, the other two genres. So, Muhammad was revealed 84 years after the Abbasids created him, 141 years after he was first introduced, yet 200 years after he supposedly lived. These are all too late. Now, on top of that, let's take a look at the people that introduced him. Look where they lived. Everything we've been told, they say, happens in Mecca, Medina. That's the Hijaz. That's the central part of Arabia. Those two green circles. Yet all of the writers of those traditions worked in Baghdad, which is 1,200 miles too far to the north. You have Ibn Hisham, who was born in Basra. He grew up in Cairo, but he did his work in Baghdad. Cairo is over 990 miles from Mecca. Basra is 1,200 miles from Mecca. You have Al-Bukhari, who writes the Hadith. He is from Bukhara, which is Uzbekistan. That's 2,600 miles away. Al-Tabari, who wrote the Tafsir and the Tahqiq. He comes from Tabaristan, northern Iran. That's 1,700 miles away. None of the traditional writers lived or worked in Mecca or Medina. They were all too far to the north of Mecca and came from the west and east of Baghdad. All of these northern areas is where the Abbasids originated from. Are you starting to get the picture? There's a problem here. Everything we know about the man Muhammad, everything we know about the Quran, everything we know about Mecca comes from 200 to 300 years later and hundreds of miles further north. Too late and too far away. Okay, so you say, well, the same happens in Christianity. We've got the same problem. Do we? Let's do the same application. Let's look at our tafsir. Let's look at our hadith. In fact, let's put the same genre that we've just looked at for knowing who the book, the man, the place is, and let's apply it to Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ also has a sirah. That's the biography of Jesus written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Am I correct? He also has a hadith. Those are the sayings by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John when it's written in red letters. Every time Jesus speaks, that's red letters. So we also have the hadith of Jesus. We also have the tafsir. Those would be the commentaries written by Paul. Again, the commentaries of what Jesus was saying and doing, Paul then applied to Ephesus and up to Corinth and to Philippi. So that would be the commentaries. And then we also have the tahriq, which would be the histories. That's the book of Acts, written by Luke. So you have the exact same four genres in Christianity that they have in Islam. Now let's apply the dates for all of them. And I'm going to take the most liberal dates I can find. I'm going to step on all of your toes. Please don't get mad at me. I'm doing it for a reason. So let's look at, first of all, the Tahriq of Jesus. The history of the early church written by Luke between 52 and 62 AD. That's within 20 to 30 years, you already have the Tahriq of Jesus written down. When you look at the tafsir of Paul's letters, he was killed in 65 AD. He was writing within 15 years of Christ's death. So within 50 to 34 years, you already have Paul's commentaries, the tafsir written down. As far as the sirah and the hadith, the first writer to write them down would be Mark, 70 AD, that's within 37 years. You have Matthew and Luke coming right along, 80 years after, and then finally we end with John, who is the last to write the sirah and the hadith of Jesus. That's within 57 years. What that means is that within 29 to 57 years, all of Christ's hadith, sirah, tafsir, and tahriq have been put together. All of the New Testament writers lived in the same place Jesus lived, and they either knew him personally like John and Matthew did, or they got the material from others who saw what he did and heard what he said, like Mark and Luke. You do a comparative between these two. When we compare these two different genres of literature, Christianity knows everything about the book, the man, and the place within 15 to 60 years. Islam has to wait 200 to 300 years. Which do you think is more authoritative? Look at the comparison, folks. Thank God we don't have that problem. As a comparison, if we were to depend on the sources for Jesus compared to what Muslims are dependent on for Muhammad, Jesus would not begin to appear until the 3rd century. How would we defend him? Yet no one's asking the same question of Islam until we are now going to do it tonight. So I'm going to make it one step further. Remember I just got done telling you that Ibn Hisham wrote the Sirah of Jesus and he died in 833 and that's 200 years after the fact? You heard me say that, right? I lied. We have nothing from Ibn Hisham. Nothing has been written that was written by this man in the 9th century. So where did this book, this is the book you all have to read. If any of you do any study on Muhammad, you have to read The Life of Muhammad written by Alfred Guillaume. This is the standard work that everybody has to go to. Where do you think it comes from? It doesn't come from Ibn Hisham. It comes from this gentleman right here, Heinrich Ferdinand Wüstenfeld, a German scholar, an Arabist living in the 1800s, who for 2 years between 1858 and 1860 went to 4 different German cities, this is in Europe, to different schools and certainly different libraries, and he just started putting together everything he could find on this man named Muhammad. Put it together in that 2-year period and published it in 1860. That is the biography that all of you have to read, because that was taken by Alfred Guillaume, then translated first into French and then into English. Everything we know about Muhammad comes from that German scholar, and it's only 160 years old. The man who Muslims are dependent on to know who their prophet is or what he did is an elderly German linguist who wrote Muhammad's story 160 years ago, thus over 1,000 years too late. Can you imagine how they're going to defend this? If there's any Muslims here, how will you defend your prophet now? Looking how late everything is concerning what he did there in supposedly the 7th century. You can see then the dilemma for scholars today. Their conclusions are Islam as we know it did not exist in the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years. The Quran probably was not revealed to one man in 22 years like Muslims tell us, but likely evolved over a period of 50 to 100 years. The conclusion, the history of Islam, at least from the time of the Caliph Abdul Malik, 685 to 705 and before, is a later fabrication. A later fabrication. Now, if that were the case, the problem is, well, what are we going to do? How is it you can see what their concern is? They said, well, where do we need to go? Well, I would suggest let's go back to the 7th century. Since we can't trust the 9th and 10th century for what Muhammad was doing or what the Quran was in the 9th and 10th century, let's go back to the century Muhammad lived. Let's go back to the century if Mecca existed, and let's go back to the century that book was written.